Ms. Cooper, your testimony today destroys two of the pillars of the president's defense and one justification for his conduct. First pillar, no harm, no foul. The Ukrainians didn't know that the hold was in place, so it didn't really hurt them. Second pillar, this president was a real champion of anti-corruption. He cared about corruption in Ukraine. I want to go through your new testimony today. It's your testimony now that after an employee came forward to you, you believe you have some evidence that the Ukrainians first inquired about someone in your office on July 25 of this year. Is that right?
That's correct.
The justification is that the Obama administration only provided blankets, so the Ukrainians should be grateful, even after being shaken down, that the Trump administration provided more. But the truth, Ms. Cooper, is that under the Obama administration and the European Reassurance Initiative, $175 million were provided from U.S. taxpayer dollars to the Ukrainians. Is that right?
Sir, I don't have that figure. The figure that say we've provided $1.6 billion to date.
Ambassador Hale, the aid that was withheld to Lebanon and Pakistan, those were for legitimate foreign policy objectives. Is that right? Mr. Morrison, did Ambassador Bolton want the security?
Yes, Congressman, he did.
Did Ambassador Bolton inform you of any reason for the ongoing hold that stemmed from this meeting? Mr. Morrison, do you consider yourself loyal to the president?
Yes, sir.
On July 25, you listened to the president of the United States talk to the president of Ukraine. Is that correct?
July 25th, yes, sir.
You knew that what the president asked the Ukrainians to do was wrong. And as you just described, your duty is to follow the foreign policy priorities of the president, but to also, and I don't think you believe that was a lawful order, and that's why you did not follow up on those priorities. Mr. Volker, we've heard a lot today about this president being such an anti-corruption president. He really cared about fighting corruption. Is Russia a corrupt country?
We're talking about President Zelensky?
On May 9th, told the New York Times, Trump basically knows what I'm doing as his lawyer. Are you familiar with that statement to the New York Times?
No, I'm not.
But you agree, as someone who has a lawyer sitting next to you, that a lawyer acts on a client's behalf, only on a client's behalf. Is that right?
I believe that a lawyer acts on his client's behalf.
One of the members of the House Intelligence Committee who just finished questioning the witnesses here, Eric Swalwell of California. I want to go through some of the witnesses. I want to start with Kurt Volker, a man who had to essentially amend some of his prior testimony. One of the first, I think the first witness called for a deposition in closed-door testimony, had to amend that testimony because there were some inconsistencies between his recollections and what other witnesses said. Did you find him credible and forthcoming today?
Yes, I did, Chris. I still believe that it's hard to believe that he didn't entirely appreciate what was going on here. But even if he was, at worst, or at best naive, he still corroborated what everyone else said, which was the shakedown scheme was being run, that Biden's essentially meant Burisma. And Chris, it's often in investigations that witnesses, for a variety of reasons, are not entirely forthcoming the first time they're asked to give a version of events, but they evolve. And we have a witness tomorrow who's in a very similar position. But I think the best thing we can do is just point out how Volker's testimony is corroborated by so many others that it is believable that Burisma meant Biden. And whenever he came to understand that, that's what the evidence in this case shows.
In the morning session, numerous colleagues of yours sought to undermine the credibility of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. The president today made a kind of crack about him wearing his uniform, which was then echoed by Congressman Stewart, who said it he said in a complimentary fashion, but was a little hard to interpret that way. There was an insinuation that the real loyalties of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman were actually with Ukraine, that he was fundamentally disloyal, perhaps even a fifth column inside the White House. Were you surprised by that insinuation, those lines of questions from your colleagues?
I was not surprised based on the way I've seen other witnesses treated by my colleagues. I continue to be disappointed, especially by the ones, in the military on the other side whose service we all should honor, but they did not respectfully honor Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's service. But all of that aside, Chris, because that is only intended to distract from the powerful evidence that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman provided. And thank God that he spoke up at the time that he did. He's not someone, he's not a Johnny-come-lately on this. On July 10, when he was disturbed by what Ambassador Sondland did, he reported. On July 25, when he heard the president shake down the president of Ukraine, he reported it. When he was being recruited by the Ukrainians in the way that they were, he reported it. He is someone, regardless of party or who it affects, he stands up and does the right thing, and that came out today.
Final question here, Mr. Morrison. Chair Schiff just mentioned this in his closing, and it struck me as well that perhaps the clearest, most succinct articulation of an attempt to extort, a conditionality, a quid pro quo, a solicited bribe, whatever you want to call it, came in testimony from Mr. Morrison today that Gordon Sondland told him frankly that he had told his Zelensky advisor, you only get the aid if you announce the investigations. What do you think of that testimony by Mr. Morrison?
It was powerful, and it aligns with everything else we know in this case. And Chris, the president can tell Ambassador Sondland over and over, it's not a quid pro quo, it's not a quid pro quo. And you can say that it's not a duck, it's not a duck, it's not a duck, but if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, Chris, it's a duck. It's an extortion scheme. It's bribery, and there's nothing that's going to change that, regardless of any legal interpretation that the Republicans want these witnesses to make. And that's what's so surprising here is they keep asking witnesses to make legal judgments when it's so clear from the evidence that everyone was uncomfortable with what the president wanted them to do and would not carry it out on his behalf.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, of course, a member of the House Intelligence Committee, host of today's hearings. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Chris.